All studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 5 minutes after 9 o'clock. Once again, the bumper music doesn't really fit. Oh my gosh. The next book is so fascinating. It is called The Bastard Brigade. Sam Kean is on the phone. He wrote this book, and it is #1 on Amazon right now. It's getting really great reviews. Let me just read a little bit from the listing on Amazon. Scientists have always kept secrets, but rarely have the secrets been as vital as they were during World War II. In the middle of building an atomic bomb, the leaders of the Manhattan Project were alarmed to learn that Nazi Germany was far outpacing the Allies in nuclear weapons research. Hitler, with just a few pounds of uranium, would have the capacity to reverse the entire D-Day operation and conquer Europe. This is a true story, and I cannot wait to have Sam Kean tell it to you. He is an historian, a researcher. This is the true story of the renegade scientists and spies who sabotaged the Nazi atomic bomb. Sam Kean, what an honor to have you on our show. Good morning.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Where are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm in Washington, D.C. That's where I live.
So is this a story that I missed or that everybody missed? How did I not know this story?
The story's been out there in bits and pieces, different characters, Mo Berg, Joe Kennedy, JFK's older brother. But what I think I was trying to do with this book is really take all of the pieces that have appeared, kind of piecemeal in other places and bring them all together. So, basically what happened was, things about the fact that we won the war and the fact that we kind of fell into a Cold War right after it. That kind of, I think, distracted from this really cool story about trying to sabotage the Nazi atomic bomb.
So when the group is called scientists and spies, that in my mind means they probably work together but not in the same place. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. There were a bunch of different branches of this overall mission of trying to stop the Nazi atomic bomb. So some were more conventional military operations. Some were spies sort of running around behind enemy lines. There was an assassination that was going on. So there's lots of different pieces here. And as you said, the book kind of brings them all together and talks about the overall story of trying to do this.
So let's talk about the spy part first. Were the spies German citizens who just empathized with the Allied cause, or were they Americans or Englishmen who just somehow could speak German real fluently? Who were they?
Well, there were different groups. Some of them were actually people behind the lines in Axis territories feeding us information. But there were Americans and other people who were kind of penetrating, going behind enemy lines and looking for information. Or you had some people who were kind of on the border where they were in the military and they would be, as soon as a place got conquered, they would sort of sweep in and try to round up all the scientists. And then they would use the information that they got to try to piece together what the Nazi atomic bomb project was doing, where the scientists were, how much progress they'd made, stuff like that. So you had people, sort of the traditional cloak and dagger stuff. The book goes into some of the things that they were doing behind enemy lines, but also people, piecing together intelligence stuff, sending planes over, taking pictures, gathering information from spies, stuff like that. So there's a lot of different facets of the overall spy work that they were doing.
Well, you've got all the human backstories in there, too. I mean, gosh, there was this lady named Irene, and she was going to help the children escape, but when it came time for her daughter to leave, her daughter refused because she wanted to be a female scientist, and she needed to take a 2-day test and examination, and I found that extremely fascinating.
Yeah, so Irene, the Irene you mentioned was Irene Curie. She was actually Marie Curie's daughter, which, a lot of people know about Marie Curie, the famous scientist who studied radioactivity, all those kind of things. But her daughter was also a brilliant scientist in her own right. Her daughter won a Nobel Prize of her own. Marie and Irene are the only mother-daughter team to win a Nobel Prize. But Marie was a bit harsh as a mother, and so Irene always grew up kind of trying to impress her mother. And then, in turn, Irene became, during World War II, active in the French resistance, so resisting the Nazis that were in Paris. And so Irene she's one of the major characters in the book for both the science that she did, which ended up leading to chain reactions and atomic bombs eventually, but also for some of the really brave resistance work that she was doing in Paris and in France in general. And as you mentioned, there was one point where she and her son and her daughter were trying to flee France. So basically trying to get out of Nazi-controlled France, get over to Switzerland, get to freedom and safety. But Irene actually stopped and made her daughter take this very important 2-day test that all French scientists, or I should say aspiring French scientists, had to take in order to become scientists. So they actually stopped so her daughter could take this test, and then they ended up escaping across the border. But that was just so important to Irene that her daughter have a chance to go into science the way she had, that she wouldn't even let the World War II and the Nazi invasion stop that. It's very important to her.
That is one of the compliments you're getting from people who are reviewing the book, is your detail to, as Robin pointed out, the individual stories in addition to the big story. So were you able to get that information with interviews, or did you find letters? How could you research that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so that's one of the things I really did emphasize with the book. The book follows 4 or 5 major characters around and really dives into their lives and talks about what drove them, what motivated them. Sometimes they had noble impulses. Sometimes these were not so noble impulses, kind of low down, dark demons that they were battling. But I really did want to emphasize the characters and the story and the adventures that they had running around Europe. And to get that information, most of the people, unfortunately, have passed away, but they still have lots of unpublished letters out there. They have manuscripts and archives. I went, all over. I went to California. I went to Massachusetts. I went to New York. I went all over looking for their letters, their diaries, their manuscripts, and just piecing together a lot of information and detail about their lives. So a lot of sort of detective work, fitting the puzzle together. But I really think it paid off with all the rich detail you get about people, like the Kennedy family or the Curies, things like that.
I have to ask about the title, The Bastard Brigade. Was that something you came up with, or is that something they were actually called as?
No, they were actually called the Bastard Unit or the Bastard Brigade. Basically, what happened was I mentioned that group of spies that was running around Europe trying to piece together information on what the Nazi atomic bomb project was up to. This was a small group, and they reported only to Washington, even though they were in Europe. So basically, they weren't part of the normal military chain of command. So in a metaphorical sense, they didn't have a parent group, so they called them a bastard unit.
Gotcha.
But in addition to that, they were pretty rough and tumble. They were pretty salty. They were always getting threatened with court-martials for doing things they shouldn't have been doing. So they kind of embraced the idea that they were literal bastards as well, and that they were, kind of rough and tumble and salty, and kind of embraced that character, I think, as well.
And we see people one way when actually they're a totally different way with their passions. You introduced the reader, us, to baseball player Mo Berg, who played alongside Babe Ruth, and it turns out that he was a spy.
He was, yeah. So Mo Berg is just a fascinating character. As you said, he was a Major League Baseball player, but he also went to Princeton when he was 16 years old. He spoke at least a half a dozen languages. Some people said a full dozen languages. He ended up going on a quiz show once, a radio quiz show called Information Please. It was kind of the Jeopardy of its day. Ended up blowing everyone away on that show, became a national celebrity after that. He was friends with Albert Einstein and Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Will Rogers and the Marx Brothers. He was really one of the most famous athletes in the world at the time, even though he was he wasn't that great as a baseball player. He was basically a backup catcher most of his career, but he was so smart and so interesting that reporters were just fascinated with him. And they loved writing stories about all the quirky, strange things that Mo Berg liked to do, like read hieroglyphics and do all these different things that he could do. But yeah, I mean, he was really a fascinating character. But when World War II broke out, he was Jewish, and he decided that baseball suddenly wasn't as important to him anymore. He wanted to go to Europe, and he wanted to fight Hitler. So he ended up joining what was called the Office of Strategic Services. It was kind of the precursor to the CIA. Ended up training as a spy. He actually did parachute behind enemy lines at least once, maybe more, to look around, try to poke around, gather information, things like that. And eventually what they did is they trained him as an assassin. And they sent him into Europe to try to assassinate a very famous scientist named Werner Heisenberg. He's a legendary scientist, won a Nobel Prize. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle, if people remember that, that's named after Werner Heisenberg. But he was also a big German patriot, and he was working on the Nazi atomic bomb project, what they called their uranium club. So Heisenberg was part of that club, and the Allies decided that if we want to stop the Nazi atomic bomb, the best way to do this would be to take out Heisenberg, to take out the best scientist on the team. So they trained Mo Berg as an assassin and sent him in there to try to take out Werner Heisenberg.
And? Did he?
And you'll have to read the book to find out.
Okay, all right. So I have...
Don't want to spoil everything, but it really is an amazing tale, I think. As I said, Mo Berg was one of the most famous athletes in the world. So this would basically be the equivalent of sending someone like LeBron James in to do an assassination mission on a scientist in Europe. I mean, this was a crazy, crazy idea. But the thought of Adolf Hitler getting atomic bombs was so frightening, it was so terrifying to the Allies that they were willing to basically entertain even crazy ideas like this.
Did the world at large understand the devastation that an atomic bomb would cause at that point?
No, it was mostly among a group of scientists who really understood, and some military leaders who'd been briefed by the scientists. So people at the time knew about radioactivity, and by this point, they knew that radioactivity could be dangerous, that if you ingested something, got exposed to radioactivity, that wasn't good for your health, it could poison you, you could die. What people didn't realize was that if you harnessed radioactivity in the right way, made a chain reaction, that you could build an actual bomb with it. So people knew vaguely about radioactivity, but the idea of a bomb, no, they didn't really know about that. It was kind of a core group of people among the Allies and among the Axis powers who knew how devastating an atomic bomb was.
So the tests that we're familiar with now, and I might be ignorant on this, and maybe most of our listeners already know this, but just bear with me if you don't mind. We know about the Bikini Island tests, and I guess the desert in America, the test. So we knew the power of it. Was that all top secret? I mean, at this point in time in 2019, we know, but did we all know at that time that those bombs were being tested in that way?
Well, the Bikini test and the Nevada tests were all after World War II. So the Bikini tests were taking place, in the 1940s, 1950s, I should say in the South Seas in general. Nevada tests, same time frame, 1940s, 1950s, maybe 1960s. So those tests were actually taking place after World War II, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The cat was kind of out of the bag.
Oh, okay.
So Hiroshima and Nagasaki were only the second and third explosions ever. And there was one explosion, a secret one in 1945 in New Mexico.
You had enlightened us again about the raid on the heavy water plant in Norway. I found that fascinating.
Yeah, that was one of the most heroic missions of the war, I think. So there was a substance called heavy water that was vital for doing atomic research. And unfortunately, there was only one place in the world that was producing heavy water at the time, and that was a place in Norway, which Germany had overrun and conquered. And basically, we decided we could not let that stand. We could not let the Nazis control this vital substance. And so the Allies, came up with a couple missions to try to take the plant out. The first one, unfortunately, was basically a deadly disaster. Everyone who went in there died. It was tragic. They brought people up on war crimes trials after the war for what they did to the people they captured during this raid. But despite that, we sent another group in there to take out the plant because we considered it so important to wipe it out. And these people did actually make it in there, got into the basement of this plant, blew everything up, and escaped afterward. So it really was a fascinating tale and very heroic, the things that they were doing.
The book is current. Well, let me just reintroduce who you are. Sam Kean is our guest. He wrote the book, The Bastard Brigade, the true story of the renegade scientists and spies who sabotaged the Nazi atomic bomb. I just can't imagine what the world would look like if they hadn't succeeded in their missions. And it's number one, real quickly, number one in the conventional weapons and warfare category. It's also number one in the number three in the German history category, number two in the European history category. The earlier comment you made about the assassination directive, and then I asked, did he succeed? And that we have to read the book to find out. But it sort of answers a question I have, but I want to ask it again. And if it throws us into a place where we don't want to go for the sake of the book readers, and it's kind of two questions in one. Do we credit the Bastard Brigade for the atomic bomb not being developed? And I guess the second question would be, only if that first question is yes, how did we stop them from developing it, aside from a key person being assassinated?
Well, there were a couple of different things going on. Basically, what they were trying to do is they were trying to round up members of the uranium club that I mentioned, but also trying to seize stores of uranium. So going in, to warehouses where they tried to hide the uranium, going in, actually grabbing the scientists, interrogating them, following up leads, things like that. So the book really is focused on the work they were doing, not only in, grabbing things like heavy water or uranium, but also kind of a manhunt to try to hunt down the individual German scientists and to keep them away from their labs, to bomb their labs in some cases, just to try to disrupt them in any way that we possibly could.
So once they were able to successfully do some of those things, were they no longer able to be spies, for the fact that it would be kind of obvious who did the explosion or the assassination?
Well, they were hunting them right until the very end of the war. So they captured the last member of that uranium club, I think it was 5 days before the war in Europe ended. So they were pursuing them right up until the end of the war, because, again, they knew that if there was something out there that we aren't aware of and they have this, we really need to stop it. Because even at that late stage of the war, they were still terrified. Just a few pounds of uranium, enough you could hold it in your hand. Yeah. They were still worried that Hitler or some of the other Nazis could reverse the D-Day operation and basically upend the war at the last minute. So up until the last days of the war, there were a lot of people still very worried about this possibility.
And you talk about Mad Jack and his diamonds.
I do. So Mad Jack is one of the really fascinating characters. He was sort of this flamboyant spy. He was a peer of the British realm. He was a full-blooded earl, but he was also a scientific spy in Paris during the war. And we mentioned heavy water before. Mad Jack at one point got this mission to sneak a bunch of heavy water off of the continent and to get it to England where it would be safer. And he just ends up going on this totally wild madcap adventure where, Germans are swooping in on planes, trying to bomb them, but he's standing on the deck with, champagne, cracking jokes and stuff. He really was a completely wild, fun character, but he's just one of the dozens of people who showed up. We needed him at that moment to help out, and he came through in a big way. So a lot of different heroes in the book really coming through, and even though they were strange characters and sometimes had dark histories, they all were focused on keeping that bomb away from Hitler.
And so was the advisor to the Manhattan Project. That was pretty cool. He was a shady character.
Yeah, there were lots of different people, as you said, with sort of shady past like that.
It makes it a little bit extra special, I think, that there's so many recognizable names in the story. What a wonderful job. I read somewhere that you had said on a different interview that this is your best book so far. This is your favorite child right now. Is that right?
I think so, yeah. It's a little hard to pick a favorite child, but this book was just so much fun to write, and the characters just really, really came alive. I just had a lot of time and space to bring them alive and go into all of their backstories, their adventures. One character I guess we haven't talked much about was Joe Kennedy Jr., who is the older brother of JFK, the future president. And basically, Joe Kennedy Jr., his older brother, basically went into the war to try to become a war hero. He wanted to get elected to political office someday, thought that being a war hero would give him a leg up in getting elected. But the only problem was that his younger brother, JFK, ended up outshining him. JFK was even bigger war hero, got written up in magazines, became a national hero for some exploits I explained in the book. And this made Joe sort of ragingly jealous. He wanted to turn the spotlight back on himself. So what he started doing was he started volunteering for these ridiculously dangerous missions to try to stop some of the infrastructure and things that were going into the Nazi atomic bomb project. And the mission he actually ended up volunteering for ended up consisting of, they took a plane, like a gigantic bomber plane. They stripped out everything inside this plane, filled it back up with explosives like napalm. And what they were going to do is take this huge plane filled with napalm, fly it via remote control over to France, so from England to France. So these were an early version of a drone, a remote control plane. And then they were going to take this huge explosive-filled plane and ram it into these giant concrete bunkers that Hitler's minions were building on the northern coast of France, because they wanted to blow these bunkers up because they thought they were going to be used to launch atomic missiles at England. And Joe volunteered to be one of the pilots to get this napalm-filled plane off the ground into the sky, and he was going to set up the remote control system mid-flight, and then he had to parachute out before impact. So again, this was another completely crazy, dangerous mission. But Joe was so obsessed with out-machoing his kid brother that he volunteered for it, because he wanted to be an even bigger war hero than his brother. And he knew that if he pulled this off and sort of took out Hitler's secret atomic bunkers, that he would be an even bigger war hero. And unfortunately, Joe ended up dying on one of these missions, trying to, again, out-macho his kid brother. So this story is about what drove Joe, why he went over there, but also how it really changed the fortunes of the Kennedy family. This kicked off the notorious Kennedy curse, and it really switched the family's political ambitions, because they really thought Joe originally was going to be the star, the one they were grooming to run for president, and JFK himself probably would not have been the political star of the family had his older brother not volunteered for this mission and died on it.
Wow, there's so many fascinating things about this particular book. It is #1 on Amazon right now. I have a copy of The Bastard Brigade. It's a hardcover copy. You are going to love it. If you call me right now, I'll pick one caller at random and give it to you. The number is 622-9622. The rest of us have to go buy it. I found it on Amazon. It's available, I think it's available in every different format, right? Yeah, even an audiobook right
It should be, yeah, and you can get it in Amazon, get it at your local bookstore. It should be available pretty much anywhere.
And do you have a website dedicated to your work?
I do. It's just samkean.com. So SAMKEAN.com. People can read an excerpt there. They can see my speaking tour, different things like that.
Okay, got a lot of people wanting the book. Let me just pick one at random. This one looks good. Good morning. Do I have somebody on the line? Are you there? Yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
You got the book.
It's Sonny.
Hey, Sonny, you got the book. It'll be waiting for you, okay?
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Congrats.
I had a few questions, but anyway,
Go ahead.
how about the Russians? Do you mention how the Russians were trying to get these scientists?
I do mention that a little bit. So you're right, exactly right. So as we were kind of spying on the Germans, the Russians were actually spying on us. So I go into that a little bit in the book, but I think I might end up saving that for a future book, because that by itself is just a rich, fascinating story as well.
Yes,
so there were
it is.
people, spying on both sides.
All right. Hey, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Larry Robin.
You're welcome. The book will be waiting for you.
Thanks for calling.
Sam Kean, thank you for being on the show with us today. Really interesting stuff.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Sam. All right, we'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala.
Here is your 1-minute news brief. A lightning strike yesterday at Clearwater Beach has left 8 people hurt, one of them critically. 2 juveniles remained at large after authorities say they attacked staff members to escape a juvenile detention center in Jacksonville. A Florida sheriff's deputy died after his patrol car crashed into a pickup truck as he responded to a domestic violence call in Deerfield Beach. A 31-year-old Bellevue man has been arrested after neighbors complained he was showering naked using a garden hose behind his mobile home. Some prepackaged egg salad, tuna salad, and Thai lobster salad sold at Target and the Fresh Market are being recalled because they could contain the bacteria that causes listeria. There was a heavy police presence Saturday night at Universal Studios Orlando, but operations were back to normal by about 10 p.m. And persistence paid off for a retired Tennessee banker who won the weekend's Hemingway Lookalike contest in Key West. It was 68-year-old Joe Maxey's 8th try.